Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Safest Family on the Block, where knowledge is power. My name is Jason, and joining me today is author and TikTok phenomenon, Cathy Pedrayes. Hello, Cathy. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me. I really like your library. It's very Beauty and the Beast of you.
Well, thank you so much. My wife is a literary agent, and I've been a freelance writer for a long time. She entered my life with 2,000 books.
Oh
And
my goodness.
my youngest son and I built her bookcases.
Well, it looks really nice. I think it's like every girl's dream from that castle scene.
Well, thank you very much. And so, Cathy comes to us today because you have your own mission and work in the safety zone. You have a TikTok channel with short safety tips. You have your book, the Mom Friends Guide. So let's start there a little bit. You got the Mom Friends Guide to Safety. Tell us a little bit about that branding, that message, and what you do with that.
You know, I guess the brand of the Mom Friends, it kind of has two meanings, because amongst women who have kids in that space, the mom friend is the one in the group who is like your friend who's an actual mom, who's always like prepared and has all the snacks in her bag and whatever. But amongst people who don't have kids, it kind of has the same characteristics of always being prepared, but just without the biological kids. And so the way it came up was like, as I was posting kind of safety tips, like I did one about things I keep in my first aid kit that are unusual, like a paper cup in case of an eye puncture wound or something like that. People were like, oh, you're definitely the mom friend of the group. And at first I didn't really know what it meant. But then when I looked into it, I was like, oh, it's the one who, always has the snacks and the extra hair tie and the Band-Aids and that kind of thing. So I was like, that's actually like really appropriate and highly descriptive of me. So the name came from really the TikTok comments. And then from there, it just became, kind of a brand where I share practical kind of everyday tips, things that mainly came from experience. But then a lot of, like, especially in the cyberspace, a lot of things are just kind of like newsworthy, like, things that I see happening in the news.
Yeah, things like data breaches, things like I saw recently your post about a new safety feature on Uber where you can have the driver recite a PIN number to you.
Yeah, I use that all the time. But yeah, exactly. Little things like that, like things that you may not know could be hidden in your settings, or, new scams that I see popping up. Just, if people recognize them, they're not going to fall for them. So the goal is to just kind of get the information out there so they're aware. So that way, when they do inevitably come across it, they don't become a victim.
Now, I do have a question for you about your career. Is that the right word these days? Your
It's all over the place.
Your experience with this brand and the subject matter, because I think you have if I have read your feed correctly, I think you have a similar experience to mine, where I was very safety oriented for a long time in my career. Did security work, bouncing work, some bodyguard work, had a high degree of black belt before I had my first child. And then having a child completely changed my relationship with safety. And I seems like you have been writing and working in the safety space before you had your first child. Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about how that changed your relationship with safety and protection?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously having a kid, I just learned more things, right? More, because kids are like weirdly like suicidal. Like they can kill themselves on anything, like too much water can kill them. And so you're like, oh my God, there are so many little things that I have to protect them from, including water consumption.
Yeah.
Like when they're really, really like little, like infants. And so it definitely adds topics that you can talk about. I'll never forget when I was at the hospital and I gave birth. It was like within the first like 24 hours, a nurse came up to me and she was like, just so you know, you don't need to use baby powder or anything like that. And I was like, what do you mean? I was like, it's called baby powder. You don't use it on a baby? And she goes, no, well, the particles are too small and it could actually get in their lungs and all this stuff. And she's like, and babies don't really need it anyways. And I was like, what? So then of course I went home and I looked it up, and it turns out that it's like a legitimate thing. You don't use baby powder on babies. Or like my doctor was telling me to make sure that the temperature of my water heater wasn't too hot so that they don't burn, just random but easy things that you can fix.
Yeah.
I can easily adjust a setting on my water heater, like not a big deal. But I think even before that, just growing up with I don't know if it's being from like a big city, and like Miami in the 80s definitely had like a certain kind of reputation and whatever. And so my mom was kind of in that world, and kind of raised me with being careful with what kinds of information you share, because you never know who you're talking to and who their friends are. And if their friend gets mad at them, you never know how it comes back to bite you. Like that kind of fear, I guess, a little bit. So I grew up with just being a little safety conscious, I'd say. And I always wanted to be prepared for accidents and things like that. When we adopted my little sister, I realized that, when she's playing at a playground, like if she gets hurt, do I have the right things to take care of that? And so I took like a 4-month or 5-month long like first aid course. It was like an intro level course for like medical students. I didn't get any college credit for it, but I just wanted to make sure that I was prepared for everything from like chemical burns to like, the eye puncture wounds, which thank God I've never had to deal with. But anyways, but then after that, my family was also a tech family. Like my dad worked in IT and whatever. And so when I started working on television as like a host at QVC, a lot of my colleagues dealt with, like creepy behavior, stalkers, people showing up at their houses, people writing letters, people making threatening phone calls, the types of things that happen when you're in the public space. And some of it's more threatening than others, but it made me realize like, well, how are they even getting your house address? How are they figuring out what car you're driving or whatever? And a lot of this information is just simply online. Some of it we post, but some of it is just like, the people finder kind of websites. And so that's when I started becoming more conscious of, well, how do I help protect myself from this? Because the company doesn't do it for you. Maybe some other networks might, but my company didn't. And so I was starting to kind of learn about how can I protect myself, because I had to.
Well, that makes really good sense. That's
So it was a combination of like physical safety and then later on cyber.
Yeah. And it's interesting how generally speaking, the two fields don't generally intersect well, where the people who are really good at physical safety, they're a little short on the cyber safety, on the information safety, and vice versa, that a lot of the people who are very knowledgeable about cyber safety aren't so great with the physical safety.
Yeah, and I think that's changing a little bit, but there's definitely a disconnect, because when I've had, for example, now I think people like on social media, there's been this sort of trend of doxing people if you don't like what they said or posted or whatever. And people have learned what doxing means and what the ramifications of that are. And Google actually responded with a form that can help you kind of counteract this if you think you're going to be a victim of it, or if you were a victim or whatever. So there is kind of like a culture of this kind of stuff happening, at least on social media. And then there's a little bit of pushback from big tech, not just big tech, because, they're problematic too, but them trying to respond to concerns from people, saying, well, this can become like physically a problem. But I know that I think from people like me, like a consumer level, the mentality is shifting a little bit, but I've definitely had issues where like I've reached out to some of these people finder websites and been like, hey, can you remove my name that's affiliated with my address? Like you could keep the address up if you need it for like your data, whatever, but just remove my name association with the address. And I got, from one particular website, I got so much pushback, and they were like, well, you're not an attorney and you're not law enforcement or a judge or something, so there's no credible threat to you. And I'm like, who are you to tell me what's credible or not credible? Like, I'm telling you, I don't want my information on there. You obtained it, through public records, like because the government has all your information publicly, but you're making it more accessible by putting it on Google versus the government records. You need to know like the person's county and all this stuff to be able to look that stuff up. And it was such a battle that I ended up, a person who owns the website made a classic mistake that a lot of like these cyber people kind of do, and that they posted on a public forum back in like, I don't know, 2010 or something. And so I found that post, and from that was able to track like the owner of the website. And so when I responded with like, hey, Bob, blah, 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 he was like, oh, well, this person knows my name. I was like, not only do I know your name, I have pictures of your backyard. I have the weather of your house right now. I have your address. So if you want to know what it feels like to have somebody get your information when you don't want them to have that information, this is what it feels like. Please take my information down. And he took it down within 30 minutes. I was like, but I had to really fight.
Yeah.
And that's unfair. People shouldn't have to do that. I mean, that information shouldn't be public to begin with. But yeah, I think people are now starting to realize that having all this data online could present not just digital risks to like identity theft and stuff like that, but it could definitely present physical risks too, especially if say you're going through some kind of custody battles, say you're a domestic violence kind of victim or in some situation like that. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why we should be thinking about that.
Absolutely. There's one particular one that has been coming into my consciousness lately. The scam's been going on for a long time, where you'll see on Imgur or on Twitter sometimes a post of somebody, picture of somebody, this person's been missing for X amount of time. If you have any information, please help. But it's not from that person's lovely family, it's from the ex.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you do see those things and you have information, always just go to the local police department. Do not respond to the original poster. Do not respond in the thread, because that's,
I also see people well-meaning, of course, but they'll find people's IDs on the floor or something, even children, and like post it to a Facebook group. And I'm like, what are you doing? I've even seen people post medical records of their children, like complaining about, an instance they had with whatever, so one of the clinics or something, and they posted the medical records to get opinions about, was this billed correctly or whatever. But I'm like, can you at least redact all of your child and family information before you post it on the internet? Like, and I do get some people that are like, oh, I didn't realize, and they'll, go back and fix things. And then on the other hand, I get people that are like, oh, I'm fine with it. The other thing that, and this totally isn't illegal or anything, but I just feel like people need to be more conscious of it, especially with children. There's obviously a huge trend of like posting people publicly doing like funny or silly or stupid things. And for adults, like, I feel like they know their risks of being in public, and, I give a little more leeway of that. But with children, I kind of have a problem with people just videoing random people's kids and posting it on the internet without thinking about, the consequences of maybe there's a custody battle or something like that. If it's like the Macy's Day Thanksgiving parade, I get it. There's going to be kids. It's like a historical kind of moment. But that's like another thing. I think people just don't give enough conscious thought over what kind of data am I collecting and sharing, and what are like the potential ramifications of it. Has anything happened from a video like that being posted online? Maybe not, but it's just a level of consciousness for me.
Absolutely. When I ran my karate school for most of the 2000s, I always had to sit down about photos, because this is when Facebook had just started halfway through. We had our website and all of that, and just asked about, hey, when we take group photos, we take photos of class, is there any reason that your kid should not be a part of those? And one of our parents was on the receiving end of a very bad custody battle with a parent who was likely to take the kid and run off to a non-extradition country.
Yeah.
So she was, no, please, I need no images at all of my child online, because this guy was fairly.
Yeah, and you know what? Maybe I'm a little bit more conscious of it because we kind of went through an adoption process and stuff like that, with a similar thing where the father was like, not the best character. But I think about that also, like foster kids, they have certain rules over what you can post and not post. And so I suppose that background a little bit has kind of affected the way I think about things, but I think it applies on like a broader level also. And then obviously if you're the parent and you want to post your kids, that's up to you. But there is a movement now about, I think, like thinking about minimizing their digital footprint.
Yeah, I think so too. And another topic on that we can illustrate is especially when your kids are posting online, or if you have any reason to yourself to be more secure with your information, when you do post photos, when you do post videos, paying attention to what's in the background. What people can glean from my background is that I apparently read a lot.
Yeah, it looks like a childhood, like nostalgic moment.
Yeah, it's like, so you worked that out on your own, did you? That I work at, and your background is very, you clearly got a lovely home, but there's not a lot of identifying things. I think over your right shoulder, I see a scratching post, so someone can figure out.
Oh yeah, I have my cats.
But that's the most personal information you're giving on in the background too. Whereas if we had chosen a different angle on the back, there might be a fandom poster. There might be a view through a window of a landmark building. There might be, a photograph of people that you spend time with. There might be a team jersey. There's all kinds of
Yeah,
indicators in the background that could give a predator or other bad
for
guy.
sure. And
information.
if you're like in a huge city, like I don't know, like New York City that has
Yeah.
40,000 residents in your building alone, like, and you're renting, so it's not even tied really to the address in a traditional way. Then you might have a little more leeway, but you still want to consider, like, whenever I've interviewed people via Zoom, like for my old company, if I saw like family photos or something like that in the background, I would always ask them, like, hey, are you comfortable with that being there for the duration of the interview? Like, we don't know how many places this will be shared and whatever, or your degrees and all that stuff. I mean, degrees for, some people, they want to share that, some people they don't. So yeah, I always talk about that kind of thing too. And I feel like with kids, that's really tough to get them to understand. But there's actually, I mean, and this like takes like a darker turn, but there's even people like on the dark web who take photos of just families who have posted pictures of their kids in uniform and stuff like that. It's kind of, the thing that they're into, kids in uniform. And there's thousands and thousands of members of these kinds of communities, and they just comb the internet and look for this kind of information. I would definitely never post a kid in uniform, like with their school, with their location of where they're going. But there's other things that I think you can kind of do to minimize the risk, which is like, maybe not using hashtags or posting to a private profile, things like that. But yeah, that's another thing, that you think the most innocent photos of like, oh, my kid's first day at school would be super innocent, and nobody can make that something that isn't what it is. And there are people out there that will. And anyways, I mean, that's a whole nother thing. And they are trying to address it using like AI and stuff like that to kind of identify this stuff, but it's a big undertaking.
It is. There's a book. Did you ever read Red Dragon by Thomas Harris?
No.
It was the book he wrote before he wrote Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, okay. I can't handle scary stuff.
It's terrifying, but and the book was written in the 80s, well before the internet, but the serial killer bad guy worked in a photo developing lab.
Oh.
Acquired his victims by looking at the photos, like see the family that he wanted, and then find out the entire layout of their house by analyzing it and figure out where they lived by looking there. And this was before
the internet. You can just go to Zillow, but
you can do that with literally everybody has that amount of access. So having that care and attention.
Yeah, and it seems, when these kinds of websites and all this stuff came out, like the goal was just convenience and all different things, right? You could look at houses virtually instead of having to physically be at an open house every single weekend. And, it makes sense. It's just that it's kind of, I think we're getting to the line where do we want to set up boundaries? Because it can go too far. And there's definitely certain countries have fully experienced that kind of like dystopian reality. We're seeing pockets of it come up here in the United States with like data and stuff like that. And, I think sometimes it's hard to get people to understand how important it is, because they're like, oh, I don't care that people know I shop at Target or whatever. And it's like, yeah, I don't care either about the ad companies knowing that I have a baby, and so they serve me data for diaper ads. I also don't care about that. What I care about is like all the background stuff, the fact that by the time a child is like in their teens, there's like 72 million pieces of data collected on them. That is really concerning.
Yeah, or that, I don't care that Target has my information, but there will be a Target data breach.
Right.
And then who's going to get that?
Right, exactly. And that's inevitable.
Yeah, I think you did hit the nail on the head about, there's this, what's the word, friction between safety and convenience. I mean, for example, you put the extra lock on your door, that's great, but then you got to unlock 2 locks when you get home and you really have to go to the bathroom. Right?
Yeah.
Or, the two-factor authentication, which is rapidly becoming the only way to keep your data safe, even a little bit.
Yeah, for now.
But you also have to get up and sigh and go find your phone when you want to buy something on. And it's that dichotomy, that friction between those two things is, I think, a major stumbling block for a lot of people when it comes to safety.
Yeah, and I mean, my hope is that some of these companies will find it is too risky to be collecting the amount of data that we're collecting. Let's really just focus on what's necessary
Yeah.
And hopefully that'll like, I mean, I don't know, that might be a little idealistic. I'm not sure. But the truth is, there is no real benefit in over collecting data. It's too much data to analyze. Most of these companies like aren't even using all this stuff, you know? So, I mean, yeah, they want to know your shopping interests or your medical history so that they can target you with like antidepressants or whatever. But you know, like they're interested in making you spend money, but they over collect. And then when that data gets, you know, breached inevitably, like you said, obviously it presents a risk to everyone but the company. So
Yeah.
other than like some legal fees that their insurance will cover.
Yeah. And we'll see how things develop. I mean, I think
Yeah.
long privacy, you know, people ask me sometimes how concerned I am about privacy, and really I'm about as concerned about privacy as I am about stick shifts and horseshoes. They were kind of neat and I have a sentimental attachment to them, but privacy, as we understood it, anybody who grew up prior to the internet age, is gone. And I
Yeah.
think that, you know, a generation from now, some aspects of privacy aren't going to be such a big deal, because if your political opponent shares those photos from your 20s, you're going to let everybody know that they like the Grateful Dead. It'll be this mutually assured embarrassment destruction.
Yeah.
But right now we're still in this period where we're all as judgmental as we could get away with being before everything was out there.
Yeah.
But everything's out there.
Well, and I think, you know, like the politics example that you gave, there's definitely a distinction between like public figures and private citizens. But I don't know legally, like it might be kind of a gray area now, because people have social media profiles that are public and brand themselves as an influencer, whatever, like myself included. Does that make me a public figure, or am I still allowed to have the rights of a private citizen? I don't know. I don't think there's been like any major cases that have maybe answered that question. Like I know Britney Spears or somebody like that doesn't have the same rights as a regular citizen, at least not in this country. But what about the person with the public Instagram profile? Like, are they at the same level of a Britney Spears, you know? Yeah, that's a question too about, but I think we still have some room to take back some of that privacy. Like we didn't fully understand the internet. We didn't fully get it. Now we're getting it. And I think there's room where we can, you know, just kind of regulate some of it. But I personally don't think that we can rely on big tech to do it for us. I think it has to come from like Congress or something.
And in the meanwhile,
ideally,
it has to come from us.
Yeah. And ideally somebody in Congress who like knows what Instagram is would be really good.
So let's shift a little gears from that cybersecurity, which is important and I think underrated until recently, to physical safety. That's another place you spend a lot of time in. One reason that I'm really excited to have you on the show is something I refer to as the context gap, which is so many of the people working in the physical safety sphere are large athletic men with martial arts or law enforcement experience. Yeah, their context around safety is different from yours.
Yeah, definitely. Although I also did martial arts, but just for fun.
Exactly. But the kind of people who would target them, the how safe they objectively are in a parking lot at 1 a.m. You know, the risks are different, the approach is different. And so I just want to ask you, what are some of the biggest things that are on your mind as you approach your safety? What are the kind of things that inform what you decide to cover on your show?
You know, it's hard to say like just off the top of my head, because so many things really come from like a real world experience. Like, you know, for example, one of my largest series is Situations When It's Best to Lie. That I was taught at QVC when I was a host there that, oh, you know, you might run into fans on the street who are like, you know, at the grocery store and they're like, oh, do you live in the area? They're just trying to make conversation. Oh, you're at my grocery store, I'm at your grocery store, we must live nearby, stuff like that. Polite conversation, but they warned us about, you know, not sharing too much information. You don't want too many people knowing that, oh yeah, I do live in the area, I'm right down the street, I'm right across the street or whatever. So they said like you could just come up with a little lie like, oh, you know, I'm just right down the road. Something like that, like kind of vague. And so I had forgotten about that training, but a couple years later, I was at the grocery store and the clerk was, making conversation about, oh, are you new in town, recommending some restaurants and things like that. And so as he was recommending restaurants, which I don't even know how that conversation came up, he had asked like if I was new in town or if I lived in town, something like that. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm not far. But as he asked that question, like all of that training from QVC came back. And then that's how like that situation when it's Best to Lie series came out to be. And that one now has like 75 kinds of examples of things to lie about. And it could be little things like, oh, is your ring real on a subway or something? And, it's not somebody, it's not like your mom asking if your ring is real. It's somebody else. And why are they asking? Like, they don't need to know you're walking around with diamonds or whatever. So, little things like that came from real world experience. I feel like navigating those kinds of awkward situations of identifying, is somebody just trying to make nice conversation, or is somebody like, is this like I don't know if you've seen that show on Netflix, with the creepy stalker dude. Yeah. So is this like a you situation, or is this just somebody trying to make nice conversation and trying to distinguish that and just kind of, I like to come up with little awkward lies, I guess, that can get me out of it, at least in the beginning, because I don't know if the person's being confrontational or just being nice, so I tend to go like the non-confrontational route. But I feel like that's probably one of the things that happens the most. But then, like you said, there's definitely things about, traveling alone, being on public transit alone. And there's some things that I think come from experience of like, where you stand near the platform or where you hold your purse, that kind of thing, having the cross strap or the backpack, like how you hold that. I feel like that definitely comes from like that commuting kind of big city environment where you get exposure to that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think for me, it's probably like the awkward situations where people might be asking for too much. And sometimes it's really like, even digitally, that happens a lot, where, I DM people all the time, hundreds of people all the time, and they feel like they're my friends because I could talk to some of these people every single day. But at the end of the day, I don't know them, right? Like, I just know an internet profile of them and whatever name they've decided to put on the internet profile. And so sometimes they might ask like a more personal question, and my guard might be off because I've been having kind of a digital relationship with them for a year, so there's a little bit of that too, where you, especially online, where you have to catch yourself and like remind yourself, like, this person is still a stranger. They could screenshot this and post this, I don't know where,
Or they might be have a different and less appropriate idea about what the relationship is.
Possibly. Yeah. I had somebody ask me, which I thought was an innocent question. They were like, oh, what are you looking forward to for Christmas this year? What do you want for Christmas? And I'm like, I actually don't ever want anything, because it's kind of hard when you're an adult. You just kind of buy whatever you want when you want it. So I'm like, oh, I don't really have anything in mind or whatever. So I thought that was just a nice random question on the internet, right? But no, then I start getting text messages to my personal phone number about this and emails about that. I'm like, how did you get my personal phone number? That kind of stuff. And it wasn't such an innocent question asking me what I wanted for Christmas, so you never know.
And you have to have that guard up while remaining friendly, which is
right.
And
Exactly.
People who are celebrities at one level or another. And don't kid yourself, you got what, 2.5 million TikTok followers? You can pretend as much as you want, but guess what?
But to be fair, I will say I've had more strange kinds of incidents from the television background than from my social media background. I think I've only gotten, you have people that are like, oh, you suck, you're paranoid, whatever, like those kinds of comments, which whatever, I don't really care if people say that. But in terms of like overstepping to being like creepy, for me, it came more from TV people. And even now, the messages that I get are like people who follow me from that, like followed me when I was at QVC, which wasn't that many, by the way. Like, out of all my followers, there's maybe like 4,000 that followed me when I was at QVC for my current. So it's not like a huge chunk of my following, but any type of like, because I'll recognize the usernames or the photos, from years ago. And yeah, the social media has not been as big of a threat as you might imagine. Like, it's actually been kind of nice. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Also, my community is mostly women. I don't know if I was posting maybe like thirst traps or whatever, and my community was all men, then, you know, maybe I might have a different experience, like people being like, oh, you look good in the bikini or something. But my community is not like that. It's mostly women. There's like a lot of kids. And so I generally feel pretty safe with them, even the 2.5 million, knowing that there's some creeps in there.
Yeah. I wonder, you know, I don't know how one would ever possibly figure it out, but I wonder if, seeing as your brand is the aware, safety conscious woman, how much deterrence that is all by itself.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think people
Yeah.
are just interested in different types of content. I definitely have men that follow me, especially for the cyber stuff. I think that's mainly what people are into. And I think the women tend to be more into like the physical safety stuff.
Yeah.
This is just me kind of guessing based off of like DMs and comments that I see. And I'm assuming gender based off of like their usernames and photos and things like that. But that, like, just based off of what I've seen, that's kind of what I see on my pages.
That does make sense. It would be interesting to find out, because that kind of curating your presence online, I think, is an important part of cyber safety. And it would be interesting to find out how much, you know, the fact that you clearly do know how to take care of yourself, and that somebody who would try to victimize you would be in for a very bad day. You communicate that very clearly in your persona, and so I wonder if that helps, or if it's neutral.
You know,
Who knows?
You might be right. Maybe it's just like not worth the trouble.
Yeah.
You know, there's millions of other people to mess with that are maybe, but, and I'm also very like, I kind of subscribe, and I don't know from a safety perspective what's like the best way to approach these things or not, but I'm kind of the do not engage school of thought. If you say something off the wall, I'm not gonna clap back or battle or whatever, because I know what state of mind I'm in. I don't know your state of mind. And so I don't engage. I just like block, mute, whatever, hide, but I don't really like it. And so I think sometimes things, especially online, can escalate because it becomes like this territorial, you know, kind of animalistic instincts, right? People have their instincts of, oh, I need to defend this or defend. I don't let you have that instinct because I'm not responding.
Yeah, for what it's worth, the people I know who are experts at that say that you're doing the exact right thing. Okay. That because they want attention, they want connection, they want reputation, and if they're just screaming into a well that doesn't answer back, that they'll go find somebody else.
Right.
You know?
That's what I was hoping.
Yeah. And that's one of those things, kind of that three billy goats gruff situation, where if you're good at security, good at safety, present a secure face, the bad guys are going to go bother somebody else, which on the one hand, that keeps us safe. On the other hand, I always feel a little bad that they're going to go bother somebody else. But,
yeah, I mean, you know, there's so many people, right? And not like all billions and billions of people on the planet follow me. So not everybody is getting those kinds of tips. And, you know, I guess a lot of it probably comes from maybe parents just kind of trying to teach their kids in the home of how to respond to these kinds of things. But yeah, there's always going to be somebody else, unfortunately. You know, I actually had this situation in my own home where I talk about scams all the time and not becoming a victim to like Facebook market scams and these kinds of things. And then as someone in my home, a friend who's been staying with me for a couple of weeks, she just had her computer stolen from her through like one of those Facebook marketplace scams. And I'm like, I'm in the house. I'm in the house. I didn't know, you know, and it happens. It was like one of those things where there was a slight typo in the email. Like instead of an I, it was an L, kind of, you know, one of those things. And so she didn't catch it and whatever, but I'm literally in the home. And
I'll do one worse. I got my first Instagram account for the Safest Family on the Block hacked because I got a DM asking for me to help and go to a certain link. But it happened to be from the account of a friend of mine whose entire family had died in a fire.
Happens.
So I was like, oh shit, whatever you want, buddy. I will do anything you ask. And my guard was down, and then boom, bam. And then I ended up having to close the account and start it over. And I make my living off of telling people how not to fall for that exact thing.
But sometimes it's just timing and contact, you know, like if a random person DM'd me, vote for me on this, whatever influencer thing, I'm not going to respond. But if my closest friend sent me that same thing, I'm going to instinctively be like, oh yeah, I want to help you. So a lot of it is just, timing and whatever. But one of the things that I do with my account, because I'm so afraid of that, especially given the stuff that I talk about, like it would be really bad PR, is that, although maybe not, because I always tell people, like, it's not that I'm immune to it. Anybody can fall for it. But like a lot of times with, like say social media agencies or brands or whatever, they want to link to your account. And, like there's applications that want to have background access to your account for analytics and stuff like that. Some of them I will give access to just because I'm required to for certain brands or whatever. But I really try to minimize that, because I'm like, if you get hacked, now I'm compromised. And so I try to like minimize what kinds of things I allow access to my platform, just because I'm afraid of it. It happened with a video platform with certain celebrities like Justin Bieber, and there were some other ones where they were using some specific platform to like upload videos, and that platform got hacked. And then the scammer ended up like uploading scam types of videos, like, oh, buy this Bitcoin, or it was something like that. Like it was a scam, whatever it was that they uploaded, and they were able to take it down within, I think, a couple of hours. But all these accounts, celebrity accounts, got compromised because of this third party platform. So I try to be conscious of that.
Yeah, it is a tricky. It's
so tricky. It's so unfair to have to work that hard.
Yeah. So we're running out of time, but I wanted to ask, so you've been doing the safety journey for a long time, starting as a child, and now you do it professionally. So you're looking things up, speaking to experts. What's the most surprising thing you've learned in the last little while? The one that made you go, huh?
I hate to keep going back to like the cyber stuff, but it really is, for me, it's like one of the most important. And I think that is how dystopian the data thing can get. I really try to stay positive, and I try not to get like crazy on my content, but like in the back of my head, I know, because I've read certain books and I see what's happening in other countries and whatever. And so I think one of my biggest fears is probably people feeling like there's no hope. I can't protect my data anymore. We've moved, we're past the breaking point. And my data doesn't matter anyways. I hate hearing that, because I know how much it does matter, and I want people to feel like they still have a choice. And because also I know that if they do take that mentality, like how bad it can really get, if somebody wanted it to be, ideally human nature, I don't know, maybe we're good, maybe we're bad, I don't know. But it's a question for philosophers, I guess. But I think the cyber stuff and the big data, that's for me the scariest and the most surprising, because every day I'm learning something else in that space every day.
I think something that's going to become more and more important over the coming years, and has been for the last 10 or so, is understanding and really internalizing the difference between privacy and security. Where I don't really mind if people figure out what I bought last week or who I kissed when I was 27. I do care if they know where my kid goes to school.
Right.
And that can be one way of kind of prioritizing your energy and attention, because unless you work in it for a living, nobody's got the time and mental energy to have perfect data, privacy, and security anymore.
Yeah.
So you have to triage what you're going to care about. You need to triage what you're going to teach your kids. And so kind of really, really drilling down into how much of my information will impact my safety, will impact my children's opportunities, will impact what I want to do as a career, because if you're a long haul trucker, it doesn't really matter what people know about you from a privacy standpoint.
Right.
Not that that's not an absolutely wonderful job. That's,
but it's not as judgy
on it, but nobody's going to be judging you on that stuff. Whereas if you want to go into politics or education or get a security clearance for some kind of job,
we just saw the GMA anchors just got let go just for having a relationship, which is, I don't know what ABC's policies are with that stuff, but it seems like pretty mundane. And they lost their job over it.
And so having that, having a realistic understanding of where that line is, because it's on a continuum, of course. I think all of us agree that where our kid goes to school is off limits.
Yeah.
Most of us agree that our high school relationships probably aren't going to matter that much. Somewhere in the everybody's individual life will tell you where to draw the line. And then I think wrapping your head around that will help you triage and figure out what it is that you need, where to spend your energy, because we do have finite energy and attention.
And I think a lot of us could probably unite around the cause of like at least protecting children first,
Yeah.
and then deciding how we feel about like our own data. But there's actually laws on the books that are
Yeah.
supposed to help children that just like aren't enforced properly when it comes to data questions. And so I think if we could start there
Yeah.
and then maybe expand, like, you know, I would be 1,000% behind that, because
Yeah.
I don't think it's fair to children. Their brains are not developed enough to have to deal with the consequences of what they posted on the internet when they were, 6 years old or whatever.
And just, not only working on the data side of it, but also on our own personal information hygiene about that, where,
Yeah.
the decal on the back of the card with your kid's name in the baseball. Now predator child's name, approximate age, and a subject that they're passionate about that you can talk to them on.
Right. I know. And, in theory, I could totally think of that kind of stuff happening. I don't know if
Yeah.
that kind of,
Mhm.
I don't know if there's data on how many
Yeah.
times that has or hasn't happened, but I know as a woman, there's definitely strangers that approach you all the time being like, oh, you're carrying a yoga mat. You like yoga? I like yoga, and it becomes a whole thing. So I feel like we probably all have little experiences of this kind
Yeah.
of conversation, of people picking up
Mm.
social cues about us. But I don't know if there's, I think it's probably just like anecdotal at this point.
Yeah. Could very well be, but it's also a very small thing that you can just, not
Yeah.
risk. And of course, anytime I talk about that kind of thing, I kind of feel compelled to also mention, stranger danger isn't really that big a deal. If someone's going to hurt your kids, it's probably somebody you already know.
Yes.
Overwhelmingly, that's how it's going to go. But
You
also
know,
simple to
it's
prevent that.
interesting you mentioned that, because Pew Research just came out with like a Parenting in America study just a few days ago. And one of the biggest concerns for parents, aside from, mental health and bullying and things like that, I think the third or fourth on the list was kidnapping and abduction. But they
Yeah.
didn't specify if it was within the family or like a stranger danger situation. My guess would be that people are probably not afraid of like their own families for it to be a top concern like that. But I found that interesting, because I'm like,
Yeah.
statistically, you're right. A stranger abduction is unlikely. Not that it doesn't happen, it does, but it's so few people. But family is a different story.
Yeah. It's so rare that statistically speaking, it's a rounding error in comparison to the frequency of it being somebody you know.
But apparently it's a huge concern in the US for people. So it's weird.
I think it's on that line. There's a whole bunch of psychology we could nerd out on about why that is, but people are afraid of shark attacks, but don't worry about the drive to the beach. Where
more people die from vending machines falling on them than shark attacks.
Exactly. We are as a species very bad at assessing risk, as it turns out.
That's a funny way of putting it.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know Felipe Marino?
No.
He was an international man of mystery, and then settled down and is now a nerd. But he has this a product, Safe Esteem, that they've got a civilian and a professional version of the app that does like data driven risk assessment.
Oh, cool. What's it? You said Safe Esteem?
Safe Esteem.
Okay.
And for example, it they've done the data, they crunch the numbers on violent crime, nonviolent crime, environmental factors like smog, natural catastrophes, access to healthcare for tens of thousands of locations across the world. So next time you go on vacation, you don't only see those numbers, but they'll compare them to the numbers in your hometown.
Oh,
So,
I see.
Miami versus Buenos Aires.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it is a very cool app, and it comes right to that. So we're not great at assessing risk, but math is pretty good at assessing risk.
I know. I think in my former life previously, like before QVC, I was a scientist, environmental. And so I did a lot of like health assessments and things like that on properties for lead and asbestos. And I guess that's all safety related too. But I really value data, even though I know instinctually I may feel certain ways about things and have fears about certain things just because of things that happen in life. For example, one time I was cutting some frozen meat, the knife slipped and I ended up with 21 stitches, right? So now whenever I'm in that situation again, I have a little trauma. But so, obviously there's experiences in our lives that scare us about stuff, but I really appreciate things that are data driven. And I feel like the safety space maybe doesn't have as much data as I would like, right? And so yeah, I appreciate like an app like that, because that sounds really cool.
Well, it's I think a lot of it comes down to marketing and sales, right? Where
Mhm.
because of the way that we worry about things, the anti-stranger danger product or app or news story is going to get a lot more traction than the make sure you know how to use your kid's car seat.
Right.
I've got
Which
two
that's
products.
another huge
Yeah.
one. Like,
Oh geez, yeah.
I saw some statistic. I don't know if it was like 40 or 60%, but basically a huge chunk of car seats are installed incorrectly.
Yeah, there's a whole thing. Actually, this season on the show, I've got an interview with a woman who does that professionally.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not safe in the seat, is it?
No.
I don't know her name, but I know her
it's not
handle.
safe in this. Yeah, it's not safe in the seat. It's I think
Safe in-
bilingual safety lady. I think is the name.
Okay.
But yeah, another example is I've got two products I'm rolling out right now. One is a phone safety contract that you do with your kids, and the other one is a school shooting thing. Guess which one's getting a lot more traction?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because all those school shootings, again, they're a rounding error in terms of statistics, but they get a lot of headlines. It's a whole, it makes you sick to your stomach even thinking about it. And so we're all worried about that, even though every family would be much, much, much more safe if they locked down mobile device safety in the home.
Yeah. Well, I guess one also feels like you have a little bit of control over it,
Yeah.
right? Versus the other one, there's no control. You could be at a library and something just happened. And so that's like a much scarier thought than, oh, I am in the decision to purchase a phone and connect the phone and, whatever. Like, although parents should definitely be way more involved with the phone situation, but in theory, you feel like, well, if they do something wrong, I can just take it away.
Yeah.
But you can't do that in the other situation.
Yeah. See, also why we're more scared to fly than we are to drive, even though driving is much more catastrophically dangerous numbers wise, because we feel we have more control.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Although I love flying, but
yeah. Me too, but you look at the things, right? You don't have a successful flight driving insurance kiosks at the park.
Right. They even have now, which is kind of interesting. Speaking of cars, they have insurance companies have sensors that they can put on your car to track your mileage to make sure, like if you're getting one of those low mileage kind of rates, you can opt to share all of your data, which, I mean, some cars are smart and connected anyways, but I was thinking about that recently. I'm like, I don't know that I would want to share all of my car data for my aunt does it because she wants the cheap rate, but it makes me think like, what are they collecting? I don't know, but that's another example of just more data.
Yeah, out there, and we're being bribed to give away information, and some of it's harmless, but some of it's not, and some of it is harmless in the hands of the people we originally gave it to, but they might get a data breach. They might sell it to somebody who then gets a data breach.
Right.
It's worth looking much more deeply into.
Yeah, I just try to minimize like I don't do any of those receipt uploading things or whatever. Some of them I'm sure are fine. Maybe they haven't had breaches yet, but I just try to minimize what I'm sure if I can. That being said, I'm obviously on TikTok and Instagram, so like I feel like I have no choice in those spaces, but all the extra stuff that I don't feel like I really need, if I don't need it, I won't use it.
No, that makes really good sense.
Yeah.
Well, Cathy, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you. I know we went over, but I talk a lot.
That's what we hope for. So but thank you so much. Everybody, real quick, where can people find you and your message if they don't already know you?
Oh, easy, because my name is Cathy Pedrayes on everything. My Instagram, my TikTok, my YouTube, which I've been trying to build, but I haven't quite gotten there yet. So that's not the best platform. Instagram and TikTok definitely are.
Outstanding. Well, thank you again for coming. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Stay safe, everybody. We'll see you next time.